Fukushima in America. The Hanford Nuclear Reservation, which is one of the largest nuclear waste stockpiles in the United States, is leaking. It was on the 9th of May this year that a tunnel at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation collapsed, bringing tons of concrete and wood and debris on top of nuclear waste contained in rail cars. And this site is where we used to make plutonium during the Cold War for bombs. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Now, it's leaking, but luckily no one was actually hurt or exposed to radiation. Of the thousands of workers that are there, everyone was evacuated just fine. But this just goes to show that even our advanced ways of storing nuclear waste are at fault, and that there's just simply too much of it to manage. And so something different needs to be done. Let's go. So as most of you probably know by now, this waste doesn't just come out of nowhere. It comes from nuclear reactors, or rather the byproduct of the use of nuclear reactors. And in order for you to understand why thorium would make such an amazing nuclear fuel, I should really explain to you the system and process that we have in place now. So this will be how nuclear reactors work in present day in 2 minutes. So, of course, the whole concept of a nuclear reactor revolves around splitting atoms. But the atoms that we use are a very special isotope of the element uranium, which is uranium-235. And the reason why uranium-235 is so special is because it's fissile, or fissile, which means that it can undergo fission and split. And so when you add a neutron to it, it becomes the very unstable uranium-236, which can split and release energy and neutrons and all that stuff, which works like this. So you start with the uranium-235 atom, and then you add neutrons, which is what will start the fission process. But the neutrons are moving so fast that there's no chance that they'll be able to be absorbed by the uranium and become 236. And so for that, you need to add water to slow the neutrons down. Then once the uranium absorbs a neutron, it becomes extremely unstable in the form of uranium-236. And because it's unstable, it splits apart, releasing the nuclear energy that was originally holding the uranium-235 nucleus together. And you're left with 2 more radioactive elements, 2 or 3 more neutrons, some gamma rays, but most importantly, heat. But this heat is both a blessing and a curse, because at the center of the reactor, things get really, really hot. And the reason why this is so bad is because these reactors, these fast breeder reactors, have to run under very high pressures to keep the water that's surrounding the core from boiling and turning into steam and just completely losing all of its cooling properties. And so that can not only cause extreme heat at the center of the core and cause a meltdown, which is bad, but it can also explode the reactor core, because all of a sudden this water just expands into steam. And so we just shove it in the ground as high-level nuclear waste that won't even have a chance of going away for millions of years. Where did you go? Ah, all right. So this brings me to thorium. Now don't be mistaken. You can't just put thorium-232 into a reactor that's made for uranium-235. That just won't work. The process isn't the same. But what you can do is build a new kind of reactor that uses something called a liquid fluoride, or a molten salt, which will encapsulate the thorium-232 until it's converted later into uranium-233. Now, I know that's probably kind of hard to explain right now, but trust me, I'm going to explain all the chemistry behind it and draw a little picture as well to show off my art skills. So let's go. And so here's how it works. So the whole reactor is based on liquid fluoride, aka molten salt, which actually is what replaces the water from the older fast breeder reactors. And it is inside this molten salt that the thorium tetrafluoride is placed for conversion into uranium. So the thorium tetrafluoride salt is brought into an area outside of the core called the salt blanket, at which point it is bombarded by neutrons to turn thorium-232 into thorium-233, which then turns into protactinium-233, which then decays into uranium-233. And so you're left with the molten salt, but with uranium-233 tetrafluoride in it. And so now the only thing that's changed is the thorium changing into uranium. Next, the uranium tetrafluoride salt moves into a fluoride volatility chamber where it's hit with fluorine gas, which then latches onto the uranium tetrafluoride and becomes uranium hexafluoride, which is natively a gas, while uranium tetrafluoride is a liquid. And so this is a really good system because now the uranium-233 hexafluoride literally bubbles out of the salt mixture into another chamber called the uranium reduction chamber, where it's then hit with hydrogen gas. Now because the hydrogen is more reactive, it steals 2 of the fluorines from the incoming uranium-233 hexafluoride, turning it back into a solution uranium-233 tetrafluoride, and it leaves behind hydrofluoric acid, which then goes into an HF electrolyzer, which zaps the hydrofluoric acid with electricity and separates them back into individual hydrogen and fluorine for use all over again with the continuous stream of uranium-233 tetrafluoride coming from the salt blanket. So then after this, the uranium-233 then goes into the core to react with neutrons, and it then undergoes fission. Then the molten salt around the core gets taken to a heat exchanger, which transfers the heat from the salt to water to boil the water and create electricity just like a normal reactor. And so by the way, all of that info from that whole lifter thorium reactor came from Kirk Sorensen. All of his work is online and in the public domain. He's talked on tons of TEDx talks and he's traveled all around the world talking to people about these thorium reactor designs. And so yeah, you can find all of his information, handwritten information, online. He's one of the biggest advocates for thorium reactors. His name is Kirk Sorensen. Really good guy. But I just want to end this presentation by reiterating why we need this. Thorium is 4 times more common than the most common isotope of uranium in the Earth's crust at about 10 parts per million, which means it's much more economical not only to mine but also to burn as fuel. And also, since the fuel is already in solution, thanks to the molten liquid salt, remember the liquid fluoride, it's already in a liquid, so it's actually impossible for it to melt down no matter how hot it gets, which makes it so much safer than the little uranium oxide solid fuel pellets that are currently used in fast breeder reactors. And last but not least, using thorium as a fuel is much more efficient than using uranium-235, meaning that there is much less high-level nuclear waste that we would be dumping into the earth as a result of burning it up. Thorium just about alleviates every single issue people have today about nuclear technology and nuclear reactors, except for one: the cost. Money, right? Money. And so why don't we use these? Why don't we just build these thorium reactors if they're so much more efficient, if they don't produce as much waste, if they're a lot safer, and if the thorium is so much more common than uranium, why don't we just build them on every street corner? Well, it's because of money. It would cost so much money to build these individual reactors. It's an entirely new design, so much science goes into it, it's an entirely new breed of reactor. But in my opinion, and hopefully I've been able to convince you of this too, is that these reactors are worth their weight in gold. Or uranium. Thanks for watching. Oh, and also there's like some of my sources right here just in case you're interested. Alright, cool. See ya.